learned about Michael Flynn's dealings with Russia. Here's what else we've learned. Jared Kushner is also involved in all this, the president's son-in-law. He directed Flynn weeks before the inauguration to contact the Russian ambassador about a UN Security Council vote on Israeli settlements. This is according to sources familiar with the matter. And here's a timeline of Flynn's known contacts with Russia. December 22nd. This was in 2016. During the transition, according to court documents, General Flynn asked the Russian ambassador, Sergei Kislyak, to postpone that Security Council vote. Then, December 29th, President Obama announced new sanctions against Russia, and Flynn asks Kislyak not to retaliate. December 30th, Russian President Vladimir Putin says he won't retaliate against U.S. sanctions. January 20th, 2017, President Trump is inaugurated. Then, January 24th, Flynn lies to the FBI about his conversations with the Russian ambassador. January 26th was when then acting Attorney General Sally Yates warned the Trump White House that Flynn was lying about his calls with Kislyak. And on January 30th, President Trump fired Yates after she refused to defend his initial travel ban. Okay, fast forward now to February. On the 13th of February is when Flynn resigned after he admits to misleading Vice President Pence about his conversation with Kislyak when he said that they did not discuss sanctions. Well, now Flynn's bombshell guilty plea would seem to have thrown the White House into some turmoil, but this morning the president said he is not worried. No collusion, he says. So still unanswered, what was Michael Flynn trying to hide? Why did he lie? And who, if anyone, may have directed Flynn? With Mueller's probe as close as it has ever been to the Oval Office, prominent Russian politicians are paying attention, and they're weighing in, calling the investigation, quote, hype, and the case against Michael Flynn, quote, empty. CNN senior international correspondent Matthew Chance is joining us now from Moscow. Matthew, what else are you hearing there in terms of reaction to these major developments in Mueller's Russia investigation?
Well, Honor, there's been something of an official silence when it comes to a response to these dramatic developments that have been unfolding in the United States. We've asked the Kremlin, of course, first of all, to see whether they can give us their comments on what's been taking place, and we've had no response from them. The Russian Foreign Ministry has done nothing except say, look, we don't see what this has got to do with us. It's just a couple of, relatively senior Russian lawmakers that have taken social media to voice their opinions about the confession, essentially, of Michael Flynn, the former national security advisor to President Trump. One of them saying that this is a case that is a sack of smoke, and essentially it is just hype. Another senator saying that Flynn is a scapegoat, and this is really just an attack on the US president. And so the little reaction that we've had so far seems to be following the previous Russian insistence that nothing untoward happened, that there was no collusion, and that essentially, to paraphrase Russian and US officials, this is merely fake news. The truth is, though, that with all this evidence stacking up and this confession of Flynn, those stories, those lies are starting to gradually, in fact very quickly, unravel. Honor.
You, I recall, went and tried to track down the former Russian ambassador, Sergei Kislyak, to talk to him about the Trump-Russia scandal. This was back in August. Remind us how that went. What did he say?
Well, I mean, he's very difficult to track down. We had to take him all the way, follow him all the way to Saransk, which is this tiny city in the center of Russia. And we kind of sort of sprung upon him unexpectedly to try and put to him some of the important questions that people have been wanting to ask Sergei Kislyak from the time when he was the Russian ambassador to the United States. Previously, he'd told state media that there was no contact that he'd had with US officials about the issue of US sanctions. We now know that not to be the case. But back then in August, I put to him that he was a secret conduit from the Kremlin to the Trump transition team. Take a listen to what he had to say. Hi, Mr. Ambassador. Quick question. Did you discuss lifting sanctions with any members of the Trump team when you were in the United States?
With your respect, I'm here to talk to Russian people.
I understand that. You say you've got no secrets.
I said everything I wanted prior to this.
Did you discuss opening secret channels with the Kremlin, with Jared Kushner, for instance?
I've said many times that we do not discuss the substance of our discussions with our American interlocutors, out of respect to our partners.
Again, in previous interviews, Kislyak had insisted that US sanctions were not discussed. But of course, again, we now know from this Flynn confession that sanctions were discussed, that Flynn asked Kislyak to pass on to the Kremlin that the Trump transition team wanted them to have a moderate response to what was then the most recent round of US sanctions against Russia. And the answer came back in the affirmative, that because of that Flynn request, Russia had taken a moderate line on its response to what were then the latest US sanctions against Russia. Anna.
All right, Matthew Chance in Moscow. Thank you for that report. Coming up here in the CNN Newsroom.